How are you all doing this evening?
Good.
All right. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight, for taking time out of your busy schedules. We're very happy to have all of you here. My name is Trisha Cortes, and I'm with the Rio Grande International Study Center. We are Laredo's only environmental nonprofit. We've been here for 22 years, and our work is to protect and preserve the Rio Grande, our only source of drinking water, and our local environment. So tonight, as part of our 22nd annual Dia del Rio celebration, we are doing this community presentation in partnership with the City of Laredo and Humanities Texas to bring down our guest speaker, Bob Zimmerman from Boston. And here to say a few opening words and a warm welcome from the City of Laredo, let's put our hands together for Councilman Roberto Bali. And of the 8 city council districts, there are 3 that have river frontage. And Councilman Bali's district, District 8, has much of the downtown and international bridges. Like, he covers a lot of that district. So it is very, very fitting that he should give a few words of welcome and open this event for us tonight. Councilman Bali.
Thank you, Tricia. On behalf of the City of Laredo, we welcome you to this event. I'm excited to see that we have such a big crowd here for this event. It shows that we have a community that's interested in our future, because every city, as you know, has water, and every city has a water source. Our water source being the Rio Grande. Tonight we're going to talk about that water source and about water sources in general. But it's great to see so much interest in our community about this. We're, as a city, very mindful of our river, and we're mindful of all water sources, or potential water sources for the city that will lead us for the next 25, 50, and 100 years. And so I'm as interested as all of you about listening to tonight's lectures, because we're all going to learn something tonight. So thank you for being here. And now we'll have Tom Vaughn come up.
And next, to just say a few words on behalf of our organization is Dr. Tom Vaughn. He's a co-founder of our organization, a longtime board member, and for more than 22 years he has done monthly water testing of the river in Webb and Zapata counties each and every month. So without further ado, Dr. Tom Vaughn.
Well, I too want to welcome everyone here. Glad to see the turnout that we have. I'm not going to introduce our speaker, but he's a very good friend of mine. I met him at 8 o'clock this morning. And we spent a little time out on the Rio Grande this morning, paddling a little ways in a kayak along the Genesee here. You know, like Tricia said, we've been interested in the Rio Grande for many years. And sometimes I think we think, well, our river is the only river that has any problems. But we're wrong. And I think we're going to hear tonight about the Charles River. How many people have ever seen the Charles River in Boston? Okay, well, a few of us have. And it has its own problems. And I think Bob is going to tell us a little bit about those issues tonight. I don't know exactly what he's going to talk about, but I know that we will all go away much better informed, and I think some of his presentation will certainly be thought-provoking. And once again, I welcome all of you. You know how important our river is to us, and Bob's going to... And by the way, Bob is not the guy that got the Nobel Prize today. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Anybody? Okay, that's good.
Tell us what you want.
Well, you do know that a guy named Bob Dylan got got the Nobel Prize for Literature today. Actually, his name is Bob Zimmerman.
So you can say you heard a Nobel Prize laureate right here in Laredo talking about the river. Okay, so as Dr. Vaughn said, the river is so important to us. It's such a defining symbol of our city, and it's the lifeblood of our city. And I think many people here have fond memories, or their family members have fond memories of being able to fish and swim and really enjoy this river. And I think somewhere along the way, things changed. And the river became a threatened and endangered river now, around the world. And people physically got away from the river. And sometimes, listening to people in the community, while there are very optimistic people, you also have people in Laredo who have lost hope in our river becoming a fishable and swimmable river once again. And so that's why we've invited Bob, because in Boston, they have the same issues with the Charles. It was a very polluted city from industrial waste, a lot of raw sewage, and, but I think there were a lot of people that had lost hope in the Charles. So Bob is going to talk about their struggle, what they went through, and how they were able to change the mindset of that city, so that just recently in Boston, they held their first public swim in the Charles River for the first time since the 1950s. That's extraordinary, and it took a long time, but it happened. And so we are here to learn from the Boston experience, and Bob is going to do a presentation and take some questions and answers. So, jot down your questions, and feel free to ask Bob right afterward. So to introduce our speaker, I'm going to bring Councilman Bali up to the front, and he's going to give you a brief bio on our guest speaker tonight.
And I'm like Tom. Tom had the pleasure of meeting him since this morning. I get the pleasure of introducing Robert Zimmerman, but I just met him here at the event, like most of you did. So I've got to rely on a piece of paper. But I learned some really interesting things about him today. First of all, Robert Zimmerman is the executive director of the Charles River Watershed Association, and he's been doing that for 26 years. The Charles River Water Association is the leading authority on the management of land and water in an urban environment. The association's efforts have led to remarkable and continuing restoration of the Charles River, some of which Tricia just mentioned. The watershed science, engineering, and legal expertise are recreating a Charles River watershed that is a greener, cooler, and more resilient to the vagaries of climate change. And that's really exciting. And hopefully we'll learn about how we can swim in the Rio Grande one day. He is also a board member of River Network. He's been doing that for 9 years. He's a member of the Massachusetts Water Resources Commission. For 25 years he's been doing that. He is also a former member of the Massachusetts Water Infrastructure Finance Commission. And he also in 2011 won the International River Prize. So maybe he didn't get actually get a Nobel Prize, but he did get an International River Prize, which is more interesting to what we're doing today. He also has another life, and he could give a just as exciting presentation. He's going to give an exciting presentation about water, but he can do just as much talking about winter sports, because he is the former headmaster and founder of the National Sports Academy at Lake Placid, which is a college and academy for winter sports, and he did that for 13 years, and they're training like Olympic athletes. He also has been 24 years a coach and head coach emeritus to the Neshoba Valley Rovers USA ski team. And I Googled this, and I Googled the National Sports Academy at Lake Placid. Amazing. It's beautiful. So I'll see that presentation next time. But without further ado, Mr. Robert Zimmerman.
So in conclusion, Let's see, I used to get arrested in the library. Can you hear me pretty well? I'm loud. Which my mother objected to as well, I have to admit. So I spent some time having coffee with Tricia this afternoon, which was a real mistake. Because she decided that my presentation isn't what she wanted to see. So she had me reformat the first half of it. So I'm going to start with the slides that I brought with me, but then we're going to go back and I'm going to tell a little, 5-10 minute narrative, because I think in it characterizes some of the work we did and how it changed the nature of things. So let's see, the first thing that I want to do is figure out how to go forward and introduce you to the Charles River. The Charles is a dinky little river. I'm originally from Michigan, so in Michigan and in Texas, we would call the Charles River Creek. It's only 80 miles long. Think about that for a minute. It's not 1,100 miles long like the Rio Grande, and 1,900 miles long. Okay, 19, yeah. And the watershed, and I won't ask you, I'll just tell you, the watershed is that area of land that drains to the river. Is only 308 square miles, okay? 35 cities and towns, 23 cities along its banks, and 1.2, someplace between 1.2 million and 1.3 million people call that 308 square miles home. So it's very definitely an urban area, okay? Heavily populated. Boston is down here, and the Charles is the boundary between the cities of Boston and Cambridge. Those of you who know anything about Boston certainly know Harvard and MIT, which are in Cambridge on the river. And on the Boston side are Boston University and Northeastern University. And then there are another 15 or 20 universities surrounding the river at some place. It's a good place to go to school, by the way, although I'm not here to advertise that. It's very wealthy in the central area. The river started to change. We started to change it in 1634. 1634, okay? Right here in Dedham, where the river makes this big bend here, we used to use grist mills, right? Water power to grind grain and that sort of thing. Well, the Charles only drops 500 feet from its origins in Hopkinton, where the Boston Marathon starts. By the way, it only takes 26.2 miles to get from Boston, or from Hopkinton to Boston. The river takes 80 miles, so it's kind of a reluctant river. You didn't really want to get there. You know what I mean? Anyway, it only drops 500 feet, so there are not a lot of good places to put in grist mills. But the Europeans, when they started settling, noticed that the neighboring river, called the Neponset, is much steeper, but there's no water in it. So they cut this thing they call Mother Brook. Think about this. Almost 400 years ago now, they cut this hummer to take a third of the flow from the Charles River over to the Neponset River so that they could build grist mills, which they did. And I'm going to forever hold it against them. Okay? Anyway, you get the drift here. We're going to come back to this map in a minute. Let me just do this. Introduce you to the 60s, the 40s. The river was foul. It was an industrial wasteland. There were 5 abattoirs, that is slaughterhouses, where all the parts went directly into the river. And that continued right up until the passage of the Clean Water Act in 1972. There were 5 paint manufacturers on the river. And you could tell what color they were manufacturing that day because that's the color of the river. It was nice. You notice the girls here, this is 1948. This is Magazine Beach, this is in Cambridge. They shouldn't go swimming. As a matter of fact, the beaches were shut down permanently in 1954. They probably should have been shut down in 1854. That's how bad the river was. Okay? This is a fish kill out in front of a famous place, the Perkins School for the Blind, in the upper lower basin. Let's see. And then, of course, Industrial pollution. This is also the 1960s. This is a dye spill. All this stuff went directly into the river. I love this one. Notice that it says no dumping in this area. And what is right there is a municipal dump, which is on fire. What a good idea. Let's put that in the river. Things have changed. These are pictures taken within the last 5 years. If we carefully monitor the river is not open for swimming every single day of the year. But we do have generally 3 to 4 swimming events in the river. There are a couple of issues. One, it has to be deep enough at the spot that you can't touch the bottom, because on the bottom is bad stuff. Okay, so we stay away from that. And we have to monitor for bacteria, not from the sewage system, but from stormwater. So if it rains in the 3 days before we schedule the swim, we have to reschedule. But other than that, these things are held actually fairly often now, and a lot of people come out. It's kind of fun. The other thing that you would notice if you visited and actually paid close attention is before 1995, think about that, 1995 wasn't that long ago. Before 1995, the living room window in the houses that were built in Boston faced into the city. They did not look out on the Charles River, because the Charles was not good. So you'd rather see the people walking down Commonwealth Avenue than see the people walking by the Charles, because there weren't any people walking by the Charles. That has completely flipped. Since 1999, as the river noticeably cleaned up, the river has become a huge economic engine of growth for the city. And I'm going to return to that in a little bit, too. But you get the idea. All of the parklands, there are parklands on both sides of the river for the first 20 miles of the river from Boston Harbor up. And that parkland is coveted. There are universities and corporations, and you get the drift, rich guys that want to own that land because they want to be on the river. In the last 3 years, we've lost 13 acres of parkland in downtown Boston to private interests. We fought them tooth and nail. But they're pretty powerful folks. Now, we made them pay a heavy price, so the next 30 organizations that want to move to the river aren't moving to the river quite so rapidly, because they spent a lot of time on the front page and they didn't like it much. Anyway, you get the drift. It's coveted area. Don't let me forget that when I return to this. Let me just see what the next slide is. Which is not to say that we solved all the problems. We have not. This is water chestnut, invasive species, and it's all over creation. We're harvesting it because we can keep it down. However, harvesting invasive species is not a solution. It's an interim way of processing things to keep things open. The problem is that the Charles has more than twice the nutrients in it that the river can handle, particularly phosphorus. Phosphorus is the controlling nutrient in fresh water, okay? So CRWA did an analysis and discovered, where does all this phosphorus come from? And, had you asked me in 2001, 2002, when we first started doing the study, I would have said, probably like most of you would say, is it comes from fertilizer, right? Of course it comes from fertilizer. It comes from soaps and septic systems. The great thing about science is you discover when you're dead wrong. And it's a powerful educational tool as a consequence. Most of the phosphorus comes from parking lots. 54%. Remember, we have a little more than twice what the river can handle, and 54% comes from parking lots. What parks on parking lots?
Birds.
And did you know that phosphorus is a major component in the refinement of gasoline? And that when you fire up your car, that phosphorus does not burn up on ignition. It spits out the tailpipe, particularly when you first start up the car, ends up on the parking lot, waiting for it to rain, where it can run off to the storm drain, go into the storm drain, go directly out to the river, and cause problems. The other problem that you've probably been reading about in Toledo, Ohio, in Florida, is cyanobacteria. It's often called blue-green algae. That's a misnomer. It's not an algae. It's a bacteria. It's a photosynthetic bacteria. It's toxic. It's associated with ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, Lou Gehrig's disease, and Alzheimer's. And it turns out, a new study out of the United Kingdom, epidemiologically connects it with breathing near this stuff, not swallowing it or swimming in it. If you swallow it, it can shut down your liver and your kidneys and kill you. This is really bad stuff. Cyanobacteria, and its problem is growing. Now, there are two causes of it: heat and phosphorus. And we're going to come back to what we're doing about that. Okay? And let me see what else I have here as my introductory. Have I got your attention yet? Let me just do this one. This is weather. The weather is turning against us. But this map is not a prediction into the future. This is a map of what's actually happened. This is 1948 to 2006, and it maps the increase in the largest 1% of rain events. Okay? So if you live down here in Texas and you look around, what you're looking at is two things. One, an increase in drought, and then an increase in having all the rain you missed for that drought period occurring in a single day. Has that happened lately? Yes, it has. In Houston, Austin, San Antonio. I was in Austin, San Antonio 2 years ago, talking exactly about this. And the guys in the audience, who happen to manage their water systems, were telling me, that's not going to happen. And I left, and they got 3 years worth of rainfall in 1 day, 3 weeks later. And they weren't very happy, because you get flooding associated with that. Anyway, look at the Northeast. You can't even see Massachusetts here. So we're in 3 years of a drought in Massachusetts right now. And my great fear is we're going to see 22 inches of rainfall in 1 day, sometime soon. And there isn't any infrastructure in the United States that's prepared for those kinds of changes. But we can prepare. So I'm going to come back to that as well. And then I think just a quick, I've been to CRWA since December of 1990. The organization was founded in 1965. So I've been there a little over half its existence. Okay, and when I got there, it was one of those little 501c3 organizations with 2 feet in the toilet and 1 hand on the flush knob. It was on its way out the door, right? I was the only employee, good luck to you, right? And we're now a $1.2, $1.3 million a year organization, down from about $1.8 million. A lot has happened since 2008, which is an issue, which we're currently confronting by an endowment campaign. But what changed our organization was our focus on science. Our focus on science and engineering, and then in 1999, I hired a litigator, an environmental litigator, a damn good environmental litigator, who is thrilled to work with scientists and engineers who knew how the system worked. We've been to court 3 times. We won in every instance in summary judgment. Never had to get into long arguments. And so now, fortunately, we very seldom go to court. Don't have to. They call us and say, let's sit down and see if we can come out to a good place and move forward. And I'm going to talk a lot about that. But first,